we live in a really unique day in the Bay Area. I think we're in a very unique cultural time. There's a lot going on. Technology is just booming right now. There's a market correction going on. There's disease. I mentioned the coronavirus. There's lots of different things happening at this time. And really, as I kind of tried to prepare for this message over the last few weeks, I looked out kind of at the landscape of the culture of the Bay Area. And as we've mentioned here many times, the Bay Area is the least church region in the United States. Least church region in the United States. San Francisco has roughly 4% of people go in the church building on a Sunday morning. So literally there are more people in line right now at a brunch place than there are right here in this building and all the other buildings across San Francisco. There are more people in those lines waiting 45 plus minutes, by the way, for an omelet. That's a long time to wait for an omelet. You can make one at home. It's not as good, but it's way quicker. That's the culture we're in. And as I looked across San Francisco, most people are in flux. They're moving, they're going places. Yeah, you might know friends right now that you just probably scrolled through your feed and saw them. They're in Yosemite, they're in Tahoe, they're in Bali. Some of you've got some money, okay? You're going all over the place. You're right with Christ the Redeemer and Rio. I'm like, man, what do you do for a living? People are all over the place, right? If you just quickly scroll through your feed, you will see where everyone is going. We're moving places. Some of you just moved here, and you're coming from somewhere else, and some of you are thinking about leaving. You're thinking about moving on. We're all in this constant state of moving, and we're constant state of going. We are in the journey, and life really has become fundamentally about our journey, not necessarily the destination. Because think about it. If you've arrived, then what's life really about? Right? What's life about if you already made it? The concepts of roads have actually changed the way we thought. Before roads, people didn't go anywhere. Right? They had well-worn ruts for them to travel by wagon, but people didn't go places on roads. Now we take them for granted, but roads have really changed the way we think because we're always thinking about moving. Destination, perpetual movement, change. And you know what? We value it. We value change in movement as a culture, don't we? It's actually fun to go places, isn't it? You like to travel? You like to travel? You like to think about traveling? Do you like to see other people traveling? Maybe not as much. I'm going to travel better than them next year. You'll see. Costco's got some great deals. And you're thinking about all the ways you can travel and go places, right? We love it. It's part of our culture. But this presents some unique challenges for what it means to make disciples in the United States. It does. It actually does. An author, Mark Sayers, he's a pastor in Australia. He wrote an amazing book called The Road Trip That Changed the World. I suggest you get that book. But I want to read a quote from him. Actually, I'm going to read two quotes from him. Here's the first one. Check out his analysis of our travel. We are addicted to the thought of leaving. To tantalize, do we have it? Yeah, there we go. We're addicted to the thought of leaving, to tantalizing possibilities of where we could be going, rather than the concrete reality of actual arrival, right? We talked about that. We are addicted to being on the road, of having the next destination hovering over our horizon. Thus, life, identity, and faith are now viewed as things in process, not yet fully formed. The security of knowing, of arriving, kills the buzz of contemporary life journey. Now, you might read that and actually go, yeah, that's totally true. I thought that's what life was about. I thought life was a process. And I'm making my way towards an ultimate goal in my life. But actually, Sayers makes the case in this book that life actually wasn't always like this. That fundamentally, communities before the road was invented were all actually about the community you were in. You were already home. There was no journey, no process. And that feels foreign to us, like people like San Francisco. I remember my friends bought a house in Utah in a city called Alpine, which is, man, it's tucked away. I'm just going to tell you, it's tucked away. It's very far out there. But because it's far out there, you can get a really large house. And their house is huge. You can fit 5, maybe 7, probably 7 or 8, roughly, of our houses in their house. It's an amazing house. But when they bought the house, they were roughly 22 years old. And in my mind, as someone who was 22, 23 years old at the time, I thought, and I told my friend, I was like, man, this is a great house. They're showing me the hot tub and the game room, and they've got 4 rooms downstairs they don't use. And I said, hey, man, it feels to me kind of like you just bought your coffin. And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, I feel like you're going to die here. Now, this is your house forever. Don't you want to, work your way up somewhere and get some to finally then land in this house when you're old and you've got grays in your beard and you're, old and drinking wine and smoking cigars and you're like, yep, life is over. Don't you want to, isn't that when you want to buy that giant house? It scared me to death. And if you feel that, you know what I'm saying. Some of you are looking at your friends who are getting married, and you're like, oh my gosh, they just bought a ball and chain. And they've had to pay for that ball and chain constantly. They have to pay for the ball and chain is going to make smaller ball and chains one day. And I have to bring those ball and chains with me. And they cost money. Right? That's what we think about life. We're nervous. It's fearful. But the thing about being on the journey and life's perpetual journey, and like I said, some of you just moved here, some of you are thinking about leaving, is it's not only physical journey we're talking about here. There's also more. Look at Sayers, the rest of his quote. It says, the contemporary self does not have to literally be on the move to be on the road. Being on the road is primarily a state of mind, one that constantly is dissatisfied, looking for the next best thing, living in incompleteness, always engaged in a quest for a sense of significance. The search for meaning becomes even more problematic in a culture which flees from objective truth, which fears authority and the holding of belief too strongly. Now, do you feel that? Do you feel that? Maybe you feel like, man, I feel settled where I'm at, but maybe you do feel the tension of picking up your phone and being physically present, but not spiritually, emotionally, and mentally present. Maybe you feel yourself out of the room. I remember being at a trip once in Tahoe, just outed myself. Yes, I travel as well. And we're out there with a friend, and we're celebrating a great moment. Our kids are together, having a good time. And my friend's sitting there on their phone, just completely gone. And I just looked at him and said, hey, where are you right now? I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm right here. I was like, no. Where are you? You're gone. You're with somebody else on a trip. You're in a conversation with somebody else, but you're not here. You're not present. You feel that? You feel that tension in your own self? I certainly feel it in mine. This creates a very difficult challenge for us when it comes to making disciples. So, how do we effectively make disciples in our current culture? Well, here's what we know about people in the Western world and about people in particular in this region. People here are very intelligent. There's lots of graduate level studies. People are beginning companies here. There's lots of people that are doctors and nurses, people that have their master's degrees in business and education. They're teachers. We have lots of different universities, Stanford, Cal, Berkeley. They're all here, right? People are intelligent here in the Bay Area. This is a creation of a lot of culture. People are overcommitted. People are overcommitted. Do you feel overcommitted in your life right now? Do you feel like, man, I've just got too many things I've said yes to? And we have very few things we can say no to. People are overworked. You feel overworked? You feel tired? Just commuting alone can be difficult. Even if it's just on a train, it's difficult. We're experience seeking. We love to go places. Not do we just like to go places outside of where we're at, but we actually like to go places in our own city. We like to go see plays. We like to try every restaurant and tell all of our coworkers it sucked. That's what we like to do that, and some of us will go on Yelp treasure map trips and just knocking out all the 4.5-star restaurants so you can tell your friends you were there. We also, though, have a deep desire for community. A place like San Francisco actually really does want friendships. It actually does want to create a sense of belonging. And we have a deep desire for spiritual understanding. We actually do care. Not everyone around you is an atheist. And actually, people that don't believe in Jesus, some of you in here, actually are seeking spiritually something, even if Jesus, you feel like, is not the answer. People like us are too committed, we're too busy, we're too worried, to be quite honest, to be concerned with like this entire giant process of what it means to make disciples. And so our posture really just becomes, listen, I'll get to it, I'm planning on getting into it, man, my calendar is so full. And after all, we've made life about the journey, and we're too busy living out that journey. So, man, how can I get to discipleship? It's going to get there. Probably when I get married and have kids, then I'll begin. Or finally, once we buy the house, or once I finally get that job, then we'll get to that point. But Jesus, fundamental words to his followers after his resurrection, however, tell another story about the process for our lives. There's an actual real tension, what Jesus says, and the way we're living right now. Rather than discovering our vision through life's progress and through the journey, Jesus grants his followers a vision with his words, and it's right in Matthew 28. Look at verse 19 for me. It'll be here. Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you to the end of the age. Now, this is Jesus speaking to his disciples after he resurrected, and he gives them something. This is called the Great Commission. God's saying, all of you, I'm leaving now. I spent some time with you after my resurrection, and I want to give you a mission for your life. A mission that's deeply intertwined with the vision that God has given me, Jesus, and I want you guys to play this out after I leave until I ultimately will return one day and culminate all the work you've been doing. That's what Jesus is doing. This means that Jesus' words were not meant to be placed as one option in a series of other options that we can decide to do for our lives. Jesus' call to us isn't another option between work, brunch, family, travel, and then Jesus. Rather, Jesus' vision is supposed to bleed into everything else we do. That means this, and here's kind of the thesis here. Every person who calls themselves a follower of Jesus has a standing order to make disciples. This is our call fundamentally from the Christian faith. If you haven't heard this before, welcome, okay? This is the call of the follower of Jesus. But I understand there is a clash between our Western, modern individualism and the soldier-like call of discipleship from Jesus. And so I know you feel that. And to the modern Western person like us, life is about discovering self through these self-guided journeys, experiences, relationships, and jobs. But for the follower of Jesus, the call is a simple one, to make disciples. And that brings us to our call. The call of the Christian, the call of the believer. And hey, I know some of you are sitting here, you don't call yourself that. I think there's going to be much for you to learn on how a person of faith, thinks about what they're supposed to be doing in life. I think there's value in that. So bear with me for a second because I think there's going to be much for you in this. So we're going to explore the call of discipleship, intention of doing it today. But if you're like me when I was a young person, and by the way, I met Jesus when I was in college, I was a skeptic, and I didn't even know what a word like disciple meant. I actually heard that and was like kind of afraid. I had never heard the word. It seems kind of scary. I had a really odd obsession with horror movies when I was a kid. And disciple just felt like a creepy, weird ghost thing, okay? And I didn't know what it meant. So what is a disciple? Here's my definition, and there's many definitions of what it means to be a disciple, but I think this one encapsulates it. And over the course of the next of the 4 weeks total, we're going to bake this out, and so you're going to really get an understanding of what it means, okay? A disciple is someone who trusts Jesus with their lives, someone who honors God, they're sanctified and holy, and they help other people by making more disciples. Now, if you feel like that's super simplistic, it is, and we're going to talk about the detail. Do we have the graphic? Here, okay, this will help you. Okay, we start by trusting Jesus. We put a saving faith. We believe that Jesus Christ is Lord, and that begins our process of this full circle movement. Then we begin to live our lives by honoring God. We start to live lives that imitate Jesus, that are good lives that Jesus calls us to by the power of the Holy Spirit. And then we also help other people. And in so doing that, we make more disciples as we do that. And so helping other people is our discipleship process in the everyday things of life. Now, the goal of every disciple is to help people go full circle. That's our goal. Okay, you can use my language. You can help other people go full circle. So wherever they find themselves in one of these categories, you want to continue to bring them along in the process. Okay, that's the goal of anyone who calls themselves a Christian. And so if someone needs to trust Jesus, you start by helping them trust Jesus. If you see someone needs to begin to live a life marked after Jesus, you want to help them do that. And if people need actual philanthropic help, or if they need help with justice, or if they need help in any area of their life, you begin to help them and model their life and teach them the scriptures, and you help them, okay? That's the call. But I know, because you're like me, we're not always doing this. And I think it's probably fair to say we're missing one or two or three of these in our lives, and I'm the same exact way. I think we're guilty of this. And so what I want to do is show you kind of the outward, what's called the progress of if you're missing one of these, what essentially is the result if you're missing one. So first one here, if you're missing, so this is somebody who doesn't really trust Jesus in their lives, but they live a holy, rule-keeping life, and they also help make more disciples and help other people. We're going to call this legalism. This is someone who isn't changed by Jesus, but is living a life with rules and is helping other people come to follow those rules. This is someone without change in their heart. You can also categorize this as someone who is in something like a cult-like faith, who actually hasn't put their faith in Jesus, but they're really good at following their own rules and also helping other people come to know Jesus or come to know whatever it is they would like them to come to know. You understand? So this is something like legalism, or someone who is hollow, who actually hasn't experienced the change in their heart, but is telling everybody the rules and they feel the pressure. Is that you? I'll be honest, it was me. When I became a Christian, some of you know my story. Before I became a Christian, I didn't drink or smoke or date girls or anything like that, mainly because I wanted to be better than everybody. My goal was I just wanted to be better, and so I wanted to be able to judge them. It's a terrible way to think. 18-year-olds, they're not super smart. If you're in here, love you, but hey, you got a long way to go. And that's what I thought, okay? I thought I was better than everyone. And so what I would do when I became a Christian, I was like, this is awesome. I know a lot of people that aren't doing any of this stuff in the Bible. I need to take this Bible and go tell them for their own sake. So I went literally to dorm rooms of my friends, and I would knock and say, hey, man, who's in there? Hey, I don't know if she's supposed to be in here, man. I mean, I was reading this book of the Bible. It says husband of one wife. That's not your wife. You need to figure this out right now. And they'd be like, dude, it's 9:30 in the morning and it's Sunday, right? Like they had partied all night. And I would go to room, and I would judge people based on the authority, not of God, but of myself. And the truth is, I actually hurt a lot of people doing that. There's one friendship that actually I really, really regret. I remember going to their house, and I was a close friend with them, and I just completely flipped on them. I changed. I was a different person. And I wasn't showing them the goodness of Jesus. I was showing them the legalistic side of religion. And I brought legalism and religion to them when I could have brought Jesus to them. And I might have been able to help them, but I couldn't help them because I was too full of myself. And the truth is, I wrecked my opportunity to be influential in that relationship. I lost that influence with that person. And to this day, I haven't reconciled that. And it really, really hurts me. And so if you're in that spot, be careful. Be careful. All right, let's move on. All right, next. Let's say someone trusts Jesus, but their lives don't model it, but they still help people become disciples. Let's say you're a Christian, and man, I believe in Jesus, I know he's God, but your life looks nothing like what he's called you to, but you still share the gospel all the time. I mean, you're doing a good job, okay? Except for the fact that if people couldn't choose you out of a lineup if they were looking for someone who was a believer, right? Couldn't choose you out of a lineup, right? What would that be? This person would be a hypocrite. This is someone who calls someone to something they're not doing themselves, okay? And I'm guilty of this as well. This is a very difficult place to be in because ultimately people do look at your life to see if you actually are following the ways that you claim them to follow. Are you doing it? I heard once that as I'm studying I was studying through theology, and I was listening to a teacher one time, and the teacher said, you know what? People aren't going to be super impressed how you can find Jesus in the Old Testament if they can't find Jesus in your actual life. And I could look at my life and go, I don't see Jesus at all. And people wouldn't even know I'm changed by him. Yeah? What about the next one? And we'll spend most of our time here. What is this? Someone who trusts Jesus with their life, someone who honors God. So this is somebody who's placed a saving faith in Jesus, who feels like they're transformed by him, who lives a life after him, but they don't make disciples. They don't make disciples. Now, I'm going to call this American evangelicalism. I'm going to put all of us in this category, all of us. This is largely, to a degree, the state of where Christianity is in America or in the West. We believe that we're supposed to pray a prayer, accept a call from God, and then live a life that he says. We read all the 613 rules in the Old Testament, follow them, and then I have a private prayer life with God, and then I die and go to heaven. Except for the fact that there's a whole 33% of our faith that we haven't actually enacted. Now, if you think you might fall into this category, I do want to say this. I don't think it's entirely your fault. I don't think it's entirely your fault. I think the church as a whole has actually failed you in many areas. We've created churches that appeal to your senses and tastes as if we were to convince you that this is the happening place through programs, through music, through good teaching. And what it's done is it creates an idea that you're supposed to come in, look for comfort, find a nice, comfortable sermonette that will make you feel good and never call you to more. And if the church stops doing that or starts doing more, you find another place. If you feel that tension, I'm sorry. We've created a culture where churches compete with one another, sending signals for you to go shop for church as if you're looking for the newest, most chic furniture in your new apartment. That's never been the call of Christianity, but that's the call of most of American evangelicalism. My friend Brian Howard, he says this: a church is not a cruise ship, it's a battleship. And I've never heard of a soldier complaining about the bed on a battleship. But that's where we're at. We go into churches, we look for a comfort, and if we don't find it, we find a place we can kind of hide. The church is not a cruise ship where we can go hide to our room, it's a battleship. But the church, I think, has done a bad job of explaining that. But here's what Jesus says about our Western all-you-can-eat buffet, cruise ship-style Christianity, and it is not a good message. Revelation chapter 3, he's saying this to a church of people, by the way. This is not an allegory. He's saying this to a church. He says, I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I spit you out of my mouth. This is Jesus talking to a church that is not on fire for Jesus. And that's not even against him. They're just kind of there. My fear is that you've believed Christianity is far less powerful than it actually is, and far less potent than it really is. And then as a result, we're actually just living secular lives with some Christian veneer on it. The call to make disciples is far more costly than you ever thought. It is. But it's far more rewarding than you could have ever imagined. And I'm sure this creates a tension in you because I think you feel that, because I feel it right now. This is the call, and yet there are places in my life I'm not living this out. So what's the real tension? Point 2. The tension, the current cultural standard makes discipleship extremely difficult, doesn't it? It's difficult. We laid that out, right? And there's 2 main ways I want to talk about. The first is that you're really busy. You are incredibly busy as a person. If you work 50 hours a week, you work 10 more hours than the average American, right? You work a lot. Some of you work 50 hours, 60 hours, and you also travel for work. Many of you travel all over the place, right? You take classes. Man, you've got dinners with friends, you got brunches with friends, you've got kickball, you've got spike ball, you've got all the things you're doing. You're having kids, you're raising kids, you're dealing with your kids in their school, public, private, homeschool. It's difficult. You got a lot going. Travel for work, travel for weddings. You don't have to go to every wedding, by the way, but you go to every wedding? And sometimes we feel busy, but we're actually too just distracted because we have our phones. And so every other waking moment that we have, we're actually just looking at our phone. And so we go, man, I'm so overworked. Well, yeah, you're overworked, but you're also distracted and tired and anxious from your technology because you're trying to be in 5 places at once. This is me. This is you. This is America. This is Western modern cities. This is where we're at. But where does this leave us? Well, leaves us too busy to make intentional choices, right? We're too busy to make intentional choices to engage in discipleship. And we'll say things like, listen, I don't have time, and I just can't seem to make friends and build community here. How could I do disciples? How can I make disciples? Now, I know those 2 things are true in your life. Let me read them again. I don't have time, and I just can't seem to make friends or build community here. I know those 2 things are true. And I know oftentimes the temptation is to say, other people haven't engaged me. Other people are so busy. But I want you, just for a second, let us all examine ourselves and the motives of ourselves before we look at the motives of other people in this. Remember, you're attempting to be multiple places at one time. You're in town once or twice a month on a weekend. It's very difficult to make friends and to make disciples when you're gone so much. When you're multiple places at one time, when you're gone this weekend for a wedding, going that weekend for a friend, that weekend for a funeral, you're going on a trip this weekend, it's very difficult to make friends and be in one place. It's very hard. You might be out of town actually 2 to 3 weekends a month. Some of you are like, yeah, that's just standard fare. But it comes at a cost. It's not that it just happens, guys. It actually does come at a cost. Friendships and discipling relationships require time and intentionality. It requires 2 main things. If you cannot make friends or build relationships here, ask yourself how present you are. In that place, you can't make friends. Where are you? Social media, easy, accessible, cheap flights, man, Southwest, man, great, are making people believe they can be everywhere at once. You know, technology actually makes us feel like we have a sense of power we don't actually have. We have technology, it makes us feel like we can be omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. We can know everything we need to know. We can be multiple places at once. We can do everything. We're all powerful. I can have a supplement or a carton of eggs delivered to me right now. Like before the sermon ends, I could have breakfast delivered, like walked to me. I'm a god, right? That's the point, right? Technology is making us feel like we're little gods, but we don't have the hardware to deal with this sort of software. This is where we're at. We're all right now in the process, because of our cultural moment, discovering how limited of a human being we actually are. And the reason you can't make disciples is because you're not God, and we try to live like gods. We can't be everywhere. Do you know why your parents, well, I'll save that one for a second. I'll save your parent talk for a little bit later. Here's what you need to do. First thing you need to do is embrace your finite nature. Embrace your hardware, that you are limited and you can't be multiple places. You need to press into God and ask Him to actually be God for you, not your technology. And then the place you're trying to make disciples, whether that's your place of work or if it's in this church, you actually need to intentionally decide to stay for a while. Intentionally decide to stay in town, even when it might be difficult. Okay? I know that creates more tension. There's the other thing that's another tension in us, is that we're unrooted. You know, the average person stays in San Francisco 1.8 years. Some of you are like, yep, it's time to go, right? Because it's hard to live here. It's expensive, it's tiring, there's traffic, it's expensive. Did I say that one? It's expensive, okay? That's the big one, okay? It's a hard place to be, it's a hard place to live. But we do feel this unrooted. Rooting means we give up on other opportunities in order to make a place home. That's what it actually means. And you know, your parents likely didn't have the choice you have. They didn't have Instagram and say, wow, Denver's a pretty cool place. I think I should move there. They didn't have that opportunity, did they? They didn't have the idea of $69 flights. Well, they did, but like, you know, let's adjust for inflation. Let's call them like $12 flights back in the 60s, okay? They didn't have that option to just take off whenever they wanted. So what happened as a result? They built community where they were. They made friends. And so you look at your friends or your older siblings and you go, man, I just wish I had friendships like those, man. Those are deep-seated, rooted friendships. Well, we want community just as much as anyone, but we've got to be able to make the sacrifice in order to make the community possible. And that's why we feel unrooted. And so making disciples is almost impossible if we're not rooting somewhere, because it requires time and intentionality. Time and intentionality. Our lack of rooting keeps us from those discipling relationships. And by the way, people can actually feel that on you. People can actually feel when you're not rooted. And you go, hey, do you want to hang out? And they go, oh man, yeah. Well, I'm only in town we'll see, yeah. And you can sense that. Like, are you gonna be at this church? I don't know. I'm kicking tires. We'll see. And we're holding off and we're waiting and we're keeping our cards close to our chest. But the problem is when you have all your cards in your hand, you don't play any. So you can't score any points anywhere. People can feel that on you. This leads to a life that is unstable, that is unable to fulfill the call of Jesus, and as a result, cannot find fulfillment in what we were created to do. And this is tough, because we all want that. And Jesus says something like this, Luke 14, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear my cross. Now, listen, this is not a rebuke from Jesus. This is a warning. This is actually a warning. Hey, he's looking at you and saying, hey, if you don't bear your cross, if you don't follow me in the call I've given you, you can't be my disciple. He's not sitting in judgment, although he is judge. He's telling us all, you've got to be able to bear your cross. If we're untethered and unrooted and busy, how in the world can we carry a cross if our schedules are so booked? Last thing, we have a call, we have attention, but then there's also a need. Here's the need: a plentiful harvest, but few workers. If you feel overworked, overcommitted, stressed out, anxious, tired, and broke, you can bet that your unbelieving neighbor feels the same thing. For those that have engaged our neighbors, we've seen an interesting pattern that they actually do desire spiritual fulfillment. Some of you are sitting here, maybe you're not a Christian, you're like, I do want something, I just don't think it's it. We have this idea that cities like San Francisco and Portland and New York City and Boston and London are just these atheist meccas where everyone's dualistic and no one believes in anything. That's not true. Do you know actually that in the United States, more people believe in the existence of UFOs than there are atheists? There are actually more people that believe that flying saucers exist than there are actual atheists. Maybe we all believe in UFOs now with the internet, but so maybe the stat's a little dated, okay? But it's true. There is not a lot of people that say militantly, I just don't think a God exists walking around. But people do say, I don't know how to articulate my faith, but I will say I'm spiritual, right? Have you heard anyone say this? Maybe you're saying that yourself. I don't know if I believe in Jesus, but I'm spiritual. Have you heard that? Some of us have heard that, right? What does that mean? I believe in love. I don't know. I don't know what it means. Like it's like the theology of Frozen, let it go, that sort of thing, right? We believe in that. Well, Christian Smith, in his work Soul Searching, if you haven't read that book, great book, in an attempt to articulate how Americans kind of feel about the seriousness of Christian faith, he actually does a few studies, and I'm going to read a portion of this to you, and then the back end of it is going to be on the screen here. So just listen to this for a second, okay? This is how people are thinking about spirituality today. He says, in our in-depth interviews with U.S. teenagers, we also found the vast majority of them to be incredibly inarticulate about their faith, their religious beliefs and practices, and its meaning or place in their lives. We found very few teens from any religious background who are able to articulate their religious beliefs and explain how those beliefs connect to the rest of their lives, although Mormons and some conservative Protestant teens were sometimes the exception. The pervasive teen inarticulately contributes to our larger impression that the religion is either de facto not that important for most teens, or that the teens are getting very little help from their religious communities, like churches, in knowing how to express the faith that may be important to them. And now here's the part on the board. The net result, in any case, is that most religious teenagers' opinions and views, one can hardly call them worldviews, are vague, limited, and often quite at variance with the actual teachings of their own religion. In the end, many teenagers know more about the abundant details of the lives of their favorite musicians and television stars, or about what it takes to get into a good college, but most are not very clear on who Moses and Jesus were. Now, we can talk about teenagers for a second, but that's actually all of us. That's all of us. We are, as a whole, adventure-seeking, too busy and unrooted, and underinformed, culturally savvy, spiritually dry people who are desperate for an answer. And Jesus felt the same desperation we feel in that tension that people are like this. I want people to know Jesus more because I know what it does for them. Jesus feels the tension. Matthew 9, he says this, when he saw the crowds, Jesus is looking, he just preached an amazing sermon. He's looking out at the crowds. It said he saw compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, imagine sitting next to him, standing next to him, saying, the harvest is plentiful, talking about the people, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Man, that's my prayer for us this morning, that the Lord would send out harvesters into the fields. If you're looking out at your work, you're like, man, I think I might be the only person of a faith in my job. You've been sent into your company, in your homeschool co-op, into your classes to be able to minister to those people. It is not your responsibility to convert people, but it is our duty to stand up for Jesus and to share the good news when we have an opportunity to do so. Not to just watch these people wander and then weep over them like Jesus did. Jesus likens them to sheep without a shepherd. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. Sheep wandering about to be devoured by wolves and to be hurt by inclement weather. And Jesus turns to his disciples and said, it's actually your turn. But I have encouragement for you. There's always seasons of pull and push in the church, and movements can begin and start. And back in 1900, a guy named James Burns, he said this: faith is like a tide that goes in and out. Just when it seems to have gone out, it comes back with force. That's the opportunity we have in San Francisco, a place that's largely not had a Christian background, a Christian faith, a Jesus-centered focus ever in its history. We have an opportunity to push forward the church with force. It is cultural places, times, moments like this that God prunes his church and reignites a fire under us to go forth and make disciples of many nations. Man, if you're sick of playing church, of just playing faith, then this is for you. The real work begins in the everyday things of life with the people around you. The church building, the gathering is meant to be a time where people gather, where we worship together, where we sing, where we take communion, where we rally and then go do the church the other 6 days. That's where we go. We gather for community, we scatter for mission and for discipleship. And so your job as the church, actually this is your break. And then 6 days we get to be out in our families, amongst our kids, with our coworkers, with our classmates. That's where we go. Now, if this is overwhelming for you, and I'm going to end here, the clue to not being overwhelmed is at the end of Matthew 28. Go therefore and make disciples of many nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And then it says right here, we always forget this part, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. If you thought you had to do all the heavy lifting, you're wrong. The fate of your coworker, of your friend, of your mother, of your spouse, of your child is actually not in your hands. It's actually in the hands of a good Redeemer, a good Father. Your job is to be hand tools to the good Redeemer and to play your role. He's commissioned you to go to work with him and to help people come to know him in an amazing way. The Holy Spirit is still present. We are not alone in this work. Now, my angst for you is that at some point we're going to have to take the pill, the red pill or the blue pill, I don't know. We're going to have to, it's been a while. You have to take that pill and you have to say, man, there's actually more to the church than just coming and hearing a message. It's actually about my life lorded and given over to Jesus and then doing something about that as a result. And if that excites you, I'm excited too. Let's pray.